All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Summer Serpis and I'm the Assistant Director of CAP. And we are here for our third webinar in our series this semester, focused on AB 705 research updates on English learners. And this webinar series was inspired by our recent publication, our recent issue of the Capacity Gazette, focused on strategies that boost transfer level English completion for English learners. The webinar series has so far spotlighted the collaborative work of ESL and English faculty at select colleges that have engaged in this transformative work. And if you're interested in our previous webinars, those are all linked on the CAP website on the publications page. And you can also check out the Capacity Gazette there. Today, we are connecting with some of our favorite researchers who will provide updates on the most recent research guiding these changes. So today from the Research and Planning Group, we have Craig Hayward, Associate Vice Chancellor of Analytics and Innovation at Kern Community College District, and Terrence Willett, Dean of Research Planning and Institutional Effectiveness at Cabrillo College. And Craig and Terrence will share information from a recent PACE report as well as an upcoming publication. And then we will hand it over to Olga Rodriguez, Director of the Public Policy Institute of California's Higher Education Center. And she will be sharing research from PPIC's recent publication that just came out, I think just this week, English as a Second Language in California's Community Colleges. So thank you all for being here. We are recording this session. It will be up on the CAP website on the publications page, so you can find it there with the materials as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Craig and Terrence.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Summer, and welcome everyone. It's our pleasure to share with you some research that we've published recently from the Multiple Measures Assessment Project, as well as some upcoming research on international students. We have a few slides in here to whet your appetite for that research. The focus of our presentation today is looking at pathways through community colleges for English learners who have graduated from U.S. high schools. Access and success in transferable college level English composition. And Terrence, there's a little interesting feature of this intro slide. I don't know if you wanted to say a word or two about that.
Yeah, you'll notice the strike through Cabrillo. A couple of weeks ago, our board of trustees voted to change the name of the college since Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo. Now that we know more of his history, he engaged in some unsavory activities, including violently putting down indigenous uprisings in Guatemala and engaging in slave trade. So we're going to find a better name.
Good luck on that. Looking forward to seeing what comes out. I mean, I still feel like it's going to be Santa Cruz Community College, but we'll see. We'll see. There are a lot of good options in the running.
That's imperialist as well. So we're gonna
do okay.
Even better.
Well, then maybe that won't win out today. So the first thing that I want to share with you in this slide is our approach to studying English learners in the California Community College system and in the California high school system is to, first of all, realize that we're talking about English learners, not necessarily ESL students in the sense that they've enrolled in an ESL class. So we prefer the term English learners versus ESL students. As English learners, often we see enroll in quote unquote mainstream English classes or English classes with other forms of co-requisite support. There are three primary groups of English learners that have been affected by AB 705. And so we talk about English learners who are U.S. high school graduates, the main focus of our talk today, international students, the main focus of the upcoming paper that's going to be released a little later this month. And we'll give a little preview of some of the descriptive data that we found that's exciting and interesting about international students. And then this third group, which is a bit more ambiguous, they are English learners who are degree seeking, because that means they would require the completion of English composition. And therefore, they're under the umbrella of students who are affected by AB 705. And because we don't collect, native language or primary language, language spoken at the home, anything like that on the application as a system in CCC Apply, the only way we know that these students are English learners are that they enroll in ESL classes. So while for the first two groups, we're able to see that they're enrolling in an ESL pathway or an English pathway, for this third group, we really only see them when they enroll in ESL classes. And that's a little over a third, about 37% of all students fall into one of these categories. And you may ask, why is it so few? It seems like that's a pretty comprehensive group of students. And the AB 705 is really focused on students in the credit pathway who need that English composition. So the groups with the check marks, and you can see the big purple group on the left are students who enrolled in non-credit classes and don't have a degree or transfer goal. And we put an exclamation point next to the English language learners who are U.S. high school graduates who enrolled in non-credit as an area of kind of falling in the cracks, if you will. They weren't included in our study of credit students, but we wanted to note that that's probably a suboptimal placement for students coming out of a U.S. high school with a diploma. So something to be alert to is placing U.S. high school graduates into non-credit ESL. There are some caveats to that. Of course, students per AB 1805 need to be informed of their right to access ESL curriculum, and that is important. But it should almost always be in credit, although there, I'm sure, certain cases where non-credit could be relevant, but that's a pretty good chunk of students going into non-credit. It may have to do with availability of curriculum at specific colleges, for instance. So with that intro, let me turn it over to Terrence to give us a little bit more background around the context of the study.
And just a brief recap of the key elements of AB 705. It requires the maximization of the probability that a student will enter and complete transfer level English and math within 1 year of starting the sequence. But for ESL, it's within 3 years of starting the credit sequence. And so the clock doesn't start with the non-credit part. And then there's a newly passed 1705 that I think has more implications on the math side, but there's a comment in there about not allowing placement of ESL high school grads into ESL. And so that's something to, we're still looking at that law and interpreting it, and waiting for some guidance memos from the chancellor's office as well. So that's something to think about and take a look at.
Yeah, and if you look at Title V, it's clear that students who have a U.S. high school GPA are to receive a default placement, and again, with the advisory and that they have the right to enroll in ESL.
And there are some comments about transfer level ESL. There are a few colleges that have transfer level ESL that's equivalent to college composition, including my college. They're fairly rare and difficult to get articulated, but they're, I think more people are working on those as well.
Yeah, I would say there's growing momentum there, and we'll take a close look at that as a kind of an optimizer or one of very strong pathways that's an option. Now, Terrence and I promised we'd be disciplined and move through these slides briskly, as we do not have a full hour. So we're going to try to stay on track here. We did want to give you a quick preview of some of the international student findings that are really interesting. When we look at international students, we see that about 2/3 of them start on the ESL pathway, and about 1 out of 3 are starting on the English pathway. Those that start on the English pathway, the majority are starting directly at transfer level. And you can see that little 1% a gray bar at transfer level, that's a transfer level English equivalent, ESL. So at the time of this research, there were 6 such courses in existence across the system, but that there's been a lot of effort to expand that. And I'm expecting we will see more and more of those classes coming online in the near future. So that's where the bulk of the students are enrolling at transfer level, 1 level below and 2 levels below. And so Terrence, I think maybe you were supposed to take this slide, but I got too excited and took it. So I'm going to let you address the next slide.
All right, forget practice. So here we go, taking a look by the origin of students, where are they coming from, and what is their throughput, starting off in the ESL path, which is in the gray bars, versus the English transfer path, which are the orange bars. Across the board, we see that your throughput is higher if you start in English than ESL, and that's going to be a theme that you're seeing. And another equity question is, are international students from different areas more or less likely to be in one pathway versus another, which has equity implications, especially when one pathway is associated with much higher throughput rates. But then you also get into pedagogical questions about how similar is a student's native language to English in terms, and how many other languages do they already know, in terms of how much effort it is to acquire English and master instruction that's delivered in English.
Absolutely. So much more to say here, but I'm going to be disciplined and move on, talk about the EL US high school students. And our kind of primary question we're going to address today is the extent to which the initial pathway selection, ESL or English, and the initial placement level at the community college, how is that related to students' throughput? And the quick overview of the methods here, Terrence, I'll let you walk us through this.
So the data are from the CalPass Plus, which is administered by ERP. It's a voluntary data system that links K-12 and post-secondary data. And then linking those data and performing a variety of descriptive and inferential analyses to answer our research questions. A couple of key variables that you'll be seeing. One is ELD intensity, and that is how many English language development courses did a student take in high school, and Craig developed it into a ratio to look at how many ELD courses out of how many language courses overall to be an ELD intensity measure. And there's some caveats there. And then throughput rate, the proportion of students who are completing Gateway English within 1 academic year if they're in an English pathway, or 3 academic years if they're in an ESL pathway. So throughput rate of completion of transfer level within these 2 different timeframes, and the diagram shows the timeframes for the 2 different pathways.
So when we look at how US high school students land in the community college, we mentioned that there's a kind of a primary track switch or bifurcation into the English pathway or the ESL pathway. Historically, the English pathway was either placement into transfer level English or placement into developmental English. We have the historical data on placement into developmental English, but currently the default rules are placing all students with GPA into transfer level English, either with or without co-requisite support. And then there's the ESL pathway, this kind of standard or typical multi-level ESL pathway, which can have up to 9 levels if you count the transfer level English equivalent ESL, which we abbreviate as TLEE. Or something that is more of a concept we explore in this paper, which is the streamlined ESL pathway, which is placing a student 1 level below and then moving them directly into TLEE or into English composition. So what does that look like in terms of throughput for an ESL pathway? When we look at this for US high school students, and there's more to this, of course. I'm sure that I saw there were some questions in the chat, and We might have some time to get into some of those nuances. But for instance, one of the things we looked at was the number of years a student spends in a U.S. high school, and found that that is not associated with throughput, in that even if a student only comes in their senior year, has 1 year, and then graduates, those students are still highly likely. They're not really different. Their profile isn't different from students who spent 4 years in a U.S. high school. And there's probably a lot of background reasons for that, but that's what the data is showing us. So a little bit of a side there. When we look at just raw throughput on the ESL path, this is with placement into all of those available levels, the overall throughput is 24% within 3 years, and 3 years is the time frame prescribed in AB 705. When we shorten that to that streamlined view, where the student enrolls 1 level below and then moves directly into TLE or English composition, we see a 38% throughput rate. But that's only a 1-year window. Technically, they should have a 3-year window for an ESL pathway. So then I'm going to skip over the gray bar for now, move to the third orange bar. 64% is the throughput rate, the 3-year throughput rate for students who start off in a kind of a streamlined ESL scenario, where they're starting at 1 level below and moving directly into transferable level English or equivalent immediately after that. When we compare that to students, and we have a more complex model that accounts for variations among students' backgrounds, and so we see that the transfer level English pathway does have the highest throughput at 71%. When we apply controls for differences in students' background, differences in GPA, that does bring it down a little bit. The adjusted throughput rate is 69%. So the functional comparison is a 3-year throughput rate of 64% on the ESL pathway versus a 69%, or I should say that's the streamlined ESL pathway, versus 69% for direct enrollment in transfer level English. For, again, these are U.S. high school graduates. And now we'll delve in a little bit and try to unpack the differences. So among students, there are, of course, differences in students' backgrounds with English, and how do those factor in when we look at throughput? And one of the things we were looking at was this English language development, which is the high school ESL class, if you will, the intensity of engagement with ELD while these students were in high school. So Terrence, what are we seeing here on this slide?
So here with the ELD intensity, and you see it goes from 0 on the far left side, meaning that you didn't take any ELD classes, all the way on the far right-hand side, where all of your classes were ELD classes. And then you see ratios in between, like 1 out of 3 means that you took 3 English language type classes and 1 of them was ELD. And you see this general association moving from left to right, where the higher your ELD intensity, the less likely you were to begin in the English pathway, which we know is associated with higher levels of throughput. And one quick caveat is that the way ELD classes are tagged in high schools and the way students are placed into those classes is not as deterministic as one might think. It gets into the funding formula for K-12s, and you get points and extra money for having students move out of ELD into mainstream English. And so there can be some differences in policy and some controversies about whether or not those students are being properly identified. So just some caveats there. But in general, we see this pattern: more ELD, less likely to start in English. And then this is then showing what is their throughput rate to completing that transfer level English class by the pathway that began. And again, this same theme, the yellow bars, if you start in the English pathway, your throughput rate is roughly 3 times as high as if you start in the ESL pathway, noting that in the English pathway for these cohorts, you only get 1 year. And for the ESL, you've got 3 years. So in 1/3 of the time, 3 times the rate relative to which pathway you started in, and then notice that there's no association or hardly any between your throughput rate and your ELD intensity in high school. And so it really calls into question, what is the relationship, if any, between how students get on these pathways and their likelihood of completing these pathways? There's frankly a disconnect there.
Yeah, some researchers like George Bunch and his colleagues have referred to this process as kind of a black box, and it seems like there's some kind of a false signal being sent by students' ELD intensity, where they're much more likely to end up on the ESL pathway if they're high ELD intensity students, but that does not correlate to a difference in actual performance on the English pathway or the ESL pathway. And okay, this next, Terrence, you want to unpack this one? We got a lot of bars going all over the place here. What are we looking at?
Yeah, this looks like a candy shop. So, so the 3 bars on the left-hand side, those are students who began in the English pathway, and the 3 groups of bars on the right are those who began in the ESL pathway. And so right off, you see that pattern continue. All the bars in the English pathway are higher than all the bars in the ESL pathway. The 3 groupings within each pathway are 3 different GPA levels. So on the far left, those are students who started in the ESL pathway and who had the highest high school GPA, the highest performers in high school. And then you have the mid GPA and then the low GPA. And then those same 3 groupings are repeated on the ESL side. And so the box that is around there and that looks like a bubblegum color, that's showing or emphasizing that those with the lowest high school GPAs, who would be associated with the lowest throughput rates, they started off in the English pathway and they had still higher throughput rates than ESL students who started in the ESL pathway, who had the highest high school GPA, who would be the most likely to succeed in transfer level English. And so there's something about these pathways that really isn't working for these high school graduates the way that we may have been hoping it had been in the past. And now that we're looking at the data and seeing how students are doing, it really calls into question the sorting mechanism. Why are students starting in one pathway versus another? And if the ESL pathways are really supposed to be helping the students, it doesn't seem to be. And just another reminder that those on the English pathway, 1 year to completion, ESL, 3 years. So 3 times as long for these high school GPA ESL pathway students than the low GPA English pathway students. And it seems like it's really the pathway that's driving the throughput much more than their prior high school academic performance.
Yeah, and there's no real difference by ELD. So even students who've been highly engaged in the ELD coursework, ostensibly those with less familiarity with English, who've stayed engaged with ELD through high school, they still benefit from exposure to or access to the English pathway at the community college. And then, as promised, this is we won't go into great detail in the interest of time, and but it is included so you can see that the model is actually quite strong. This multivariate logistic model predicting throughput, and it tells us that, ceteris paribus, all things being equal, you control for different background factors that were significantly correlated with throughput, that the students coming out of U.S. high schools are 8.4 times more likely to achieve throughput than those starting on the ESL pathway. So that leads to this conclusion, which is really just a reiteration of what I just said. So we'll move on to the recommendations and try to wrap this up so we can get it over to Olga. I know we all want to hear what she has to say about the new report. So place English learners who are high school graduates directly onto the English pathway. So this is clarified, as we were saying earlier, we put in the chat that, in Title V, students who have a high school GPA do need to receive a default placement on the English pathway. yet there is not clear evidence in the data that this has really shifted the proportion of U.S. high school students going onto the English pathway. When we did this work originally, it was about 86% of U.S. high school graduates entering the English pathway. And we've been following up on that, and it does not appear to have shifted greatly, though we just received some new data that we're going to unpack, and I hope to report that more U.S. high school students are actually starting in the English pathway. Again, because that black box of how students are sort of processed through assessment and directed to different assessment and placement processes. In high school, we should be working with our colleagues in K-12 to see that English language development courses and students in those courses are integrated into other classes rather than placed into sort of a low track, low academic aspirations curriculum, which there's some evidence that is what is occurring with students who are assigned to ELD. We want to be able to see better documentation of English learners' academic pathways from high school to college. It's really a special situation where we were able to study this thanks to having the data set from ERP, but this is not widely or uniformly available. Hopefully the Cradle to Career data set that is set to launch maybe late next year will help us do a better job of tracking these students and evaluating them. And when you are looking at English learners or ESL students, it's important to keep in mind the English learners who are on your English pathway and include them in your overall perspective and analysis. So those are 4 sort of takeaway conclusions and recommendations. And that one at the top is clearly the most important. So we have some upcoming research here. We'll let you read that. I think we're just about out of time, right, Summer?
Yep, just about time to hand it over to Olga.
All right, so we won't dwell on that. We included some references, and with that, Olga, the floor is yours.
Or sorry, I'm just going to interject quickly as she's prepping with just nodding to a couple of the comments about there's complexity around pedagogy that we haven't really addressed, and differences in ESL and English pedagogy, or integrated versus non-integrated ESL pathways. So we looked at a lot of indicators of things to look at, but then there's a lot of details that we didn't look at that are important from an instruction perspective. So just want to honor what's going on in the chat. Thank you for letting me interject, Olga.
You guys seeing the right screen? The presentation is okay. Fantastic. Let me just make sure I reset this. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. So Olga Rodriguez again. I'm the director of PPIC's Higher Education Center. And it's a pleasure to be here today to share findings from our new report, ESL in California's Community Colleges and Early Examination of AB 705 Reforms. And I want to say that this is joint work with my colleagues Laura Hill and Daniel Payares Montoya. And also want to acknowledge Rogelio Salazar, who provided excellent research support during his internship at PPIC a couple of summers ago. And so today's presentation, I'm just going to highlight a few of the findings. I encourage you all to go to our website. The full report and very detailed technical appendices are provided on our website, ppic.org. Also want to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Sutton Family Fund for supporting this research. I don't want to move on before also saying that we're also very thankful to our community college system partners. This research wouldn't have been possible without access to the student level data that they provided us. And we're also very grateful to the valuable insights from our interviews with ESL faculty and department chairs. And so with that, I'll move to our finding or to our presentation. And so so Terrence and Craig did an excellent job kind of outlining kind of ESL, AB 705. So I think I can move forward. I'll just kind of highlight here, ESL is critical for California, for the social and economic well-being of English learners in California, and just for the economy of the state. As we all know, there's a lot of research out there connecting English language skills and proficiency to labor market opportunities, labor market outcomes. So kind of helps set the stage on the importance for for the work that you all do for English learners and just the research on better understanding and improving their pathways. Yeah, so let's see. Also skip this slide. The only thing I'll mention here, something that I don't think Terrence and Craig mentioned, one of the things that AB 705 did for ESL is that it clarified that ESL is distinct from remediation in English. So it's actually courses that are intended to develop fluency in a second or third language or even more in some students. So this key distinction we feel has helped accelerate the adoption of transferable ESL courses. And we think it's an important development in helping kind of connect ESL reform to other system-wide reforms as well. And another thing I'll mention is that AB 705 implementation was scheduled to start in fall 2020, but was delayed because of the pandemic. And so, as you can imagine, the delay gave colleges more time to prepare, but the planning that had been done on placement and curricular reform at the same time also now had to be rapidly moved online in response to the pandemic. And as you can all imagine, so at the same time, faculty and students were dealing with just a variety of challenges like access to technology, internet connection, even finding ways to meet their basic needs. And also many were not as experienced teaching and learning remotely. And as we can all attest, there were physical and mental health concerns during the pandemic. So all of this kind of affected the implementation of AB 705 and kind of the enrollment and outcomes that we present today. So not in isolation. And one of the main reasons why we cannot necessarily attribute enrollment and AB 705 outcomes just to AB 705. So now I'll tell you a little bit about our study. So this current report it intends to shed light on the changes and progress colleges made towards implementing AB 705 across the system in fall 2021. And this study builds on our previous report that we published back in 2019. Using similar methods, we use both qualitative and quantitative data, including college websites, catalogs, course schedules, as well as the AB 705 adoption plans that colleges submitted to the Chancellor's office maybe a couple of summers ago that had detailed information about what were the intended placement, what were going to be the placement changes that colleges made. They reported on the use of assessments, cut scores, described how their guided placement policies were going to be implemented. So provided a lot of rich information, which we report on later. And we also used the student level data from all 115 colleges that was provided to us by the Chancellor's office. And we also conducted interviews with ESL faculty and department chairs at 16 colleges across the state. And so on aggregate, we find that AB 705 has led to remarkable changes in placement and credit ESL course structures across the system. And I'll go into that in a little more detail, but I just wanted to reiterate that it's worth noting that the findings that I'm presenting today cannot be solely attributed to AB 705, because as you know, moving forward, it's going to be very challenging to disentangle the effects of the pandemic from AB 705, given that they both happened at the same time. So I just want to point that out as many times as possible because you all know in the field, but as we interpret these findings, we cannot just say, oh, AB 705 did this, because there's a whole other host of complexities brought on by the pandemic. And so here, one of the first things that we did in our analysis was explore how enrollment changed for English learners over time, and especially during the pandemic. And so as you know, COVID-19 induced enrollment declines that have been widely documented at California community colleges and actually across the nation. And ESL enrollments were no different. So here we see that ESL enrollments also experienced steep declines post-pandemic, and these declines have persisted ever since. And so what we see in this figure is that the overall number of ESL students, which is represented in the orange bars, declined by 40% between fall 2019 and fall 2020. And for the subgroup of students who we identify as ESL degree intending in the blue bars, they represent about a third of the total ESL population, and their enrollment declined 28% between the fall 2019 and fall 2020. And so in our report and in the rest of our presentation focuses on this subgroup of English learners who intend to continue their community college education beyond ESL coursework, and with the goal of completing transfer level English or an ESL equivalent, because their goal is to complete a degree or transfer. As Craig noted earlier, they are the main population of interest in AB 705. And so I also want to note that this figure also shows that the decline for degree intending students actually had started prior to the pandemic. So we see that around fall 2018, we started, the onset of the pandemic just collided with this implementation of AB 705 to just accelerate this decline. And so, for example, as we've seen nationally, pandemic induced declines were expected in ESL. And also with AB 705, as Terrence and Craig have noted, Title V now requires that high school graduates be directed directly to transfer level English. And so some of these students previously would have started in ESL, so that is also affecting enrollments. And as we'll show later, there was also a reduction in the length of sequences, which is also translating to fewer enrollments. So it's a mix of both pandemic and AB 705, which is going to be very difficult to disentangle. And so next, I'll just briefly describe the 3 different pathways to college comp for English learners that we report on in our study. And so the first one is the transfer level English, the standard course that's offered by English departments. And this one doesn't necessarily provide any additional support. The second one is a transfer level ESL for ESL students, which we call the transfer TLE ESL equivalent. And these college comp courses are offered within ESL departments. And these courses, the ones we count, are courses approved by the UC-CSU as meeting their college comp transfer requirement. And we also identify transfer level English courses for multilingual speakers. And these are transfer level English courses designed to provide additional language support for English learners embedded within the class. And these are offered within English departments. So they could have a separate course number, or yeah, it's typically like a completely separate class, but also has received CSU UC articulation. And so a growing number, as Terrence and Craig alluded, a growing number of colleges are offering these alternate pathways, which provide ESL support to English learners who go directly to college composition. At the time of our study, when we looked at this in fall 2019, of course, all community colleges offered the standard transfer level English, 19 offered the transfer level ESL equivalent, and 3 offered the TLE for multilingual students. And we know that this number has continued to grow because some of the colleges that we spoke to for our interviews told us that they were planning to launch their ESL equivalent course in the fall 2022 or later. And so the growth in these courses and the fact that they're UC and CSU articulated is actually very exciting to see. In our last study, we found that only about 5 colleges offered transfer level English ESL equivalents. And even then, one interesting thing is that not all of these courses had full transfer articulation. So which meant that if an English learner took one of these courses and they wanted to transfer, they actually might still need to take the standard TLE course. And so we actually found that about half of the students who took these courses actually did end up taking this standard TLE course, which is not good because then it plays into the excess credits for English learners. So moving on to our findings on placement and curriculum, we find that colleges actually, in spite of despite of the pandemic, they actually were able to make important placement changes, shorten the sequences, and offer different alternatives to students looking to transfer. And here we have a figure looking at presenting our findings on placement. And before I jump into the detail, I just wanted to say that direct access to college composition was increased for English learners who were U.S. high school graduates. Just reiterate that Title V, it now stipulates this for U.S. high school graduates who may have been English learners or coming into community colleges. And so in the AB 705 adoption plans, we found that 83% of colleges report using high school records to place this group of students who graduated from a U.S. high school. Other measures, the other 12 or so, 14 or so percent actually use guided placement or other forms of other methods. So this figure presents the findings on what colleges are using for those students who do not graduate from a U.S. high school. And so what we see here is that there's been considerable variation over time. And so in the orange bars, we present what we found in a study we published back in 2016, when we surveyed colleges on assessment and placement processes in math, English, and ESL for the 2014-15 academic year. And so one thing is clear is that the use of assessment tests significantly declined, and self-placement and guided placement are now the most prominent methods used to place English learners. Also, the use of high school records more than doubled since 2014. And this is probably as a result of the fact that this is just mandated for all like the rest of the population. So more ESL students are benefiting from this as well. And just to mention that the movement in this direction was likely accelerated by the pandemic as well, because as you know, the assessment tests rely on testing centers, and these testing centers were shut down. So colleges had to kind of quickly rethink assessment process, and they likely adopted guided placement approaches to placement method as their placement method. I do want to highlight, however, we took a closer look at colleges who continued to use well, more generally, I think we took a look to see if there were any differences in placement policies in relation to kind of how they were structured in their ESL sequences. And one of the things that really stood out is that colleges that continue to use standardized tests actually also have longer sequences compared to those not using standardized tests, about 5 levels compared to 4. When we took a closer look at cut scores for those colleges using standardized placement tests, we continue to see a variation in the use in cut score set for access to the same level. And this is one thing where we see that could potentially lead to inequities, and this inequity is then compounded because we also find variation in whether or not a college offers direct access to college composition for English learners. As Craig and Terrence kind of discussed, there's a big difference in throughput and in student college and course outcomes, depending on where they start the sequence. And so just to kind of say a little bit about what this means in practice, say a student comes in and they score 115 on the AccuPlacer reading skills test. If a student enrolls at a college that does not offer this, a TLE ESL equivalent course, for example, they will be referred to ESL 1 level below. While the same student who has a 115 on the AccuPlacer, it goes and attends a a college that does offer this ESL equivalent, they would go straight into college composition. So the same score, supposedly the same like English language skills, they're having very different experiences by whether or not the college offers this access. And so I'll end by saying that similar inequities may be coming up with guided placement, and it's just that those rules are not as straightforward as cut scores. This can happen, for example, if ESL guided placement rules are requiring placement into ESL, even though these English learners might be better served by direct access to a TLE or a TLE ESL equivalent. So we just feel it's going to be critical for the Chancellor's Office and individual colleges to monitor the validity. And I know that's coming because that actually also happened for math and English, and I've heard that similar validation processes are going to happen for ESL. So as we all know, placement is only half of the story with AB 705. In terms of the sequence length, we find that 87% of colleges now offer sequences that are 5 or fewer levels long. Our interview suggested that most ESL departments actually started to make these changes in anticipation of the deadline, and prior to so the blue bars show you what we reported in our last study, and for our last study 54% of colleges offered sequences that were at least 6 levels, and this made it impossible for students who started at the lowest level to complete transfer level English within 3 years. So nonetheless, we want to mention that longer sequences are not necessarily a bad thing if students who are there to only improve their language skills are served. Just saying that if the students' goals are to complete transfer level English for their degree or transfer purposes, then we'll want to kind of monitor where they start, as Terrence and Craig alluded to. So at the same time, the length of sequences only tell us half of the story. Where students actually enroll is even more important. And so what we see here is that post AB 705, we find that students in ESL sequences are much more likely to start just 1 level below transfer English, close to 20%, and this was the case for only 8% of ESL students in our last study. So yeah, that's, for the sake of time, that's all I'll highlight here. When we looked at passing rates across the different transfer level English options that colleges now offer, we find that in fall 2021, which is the first semester when community colleges were required to implement the new placement and policy, or just the semester of AB 705, first time we present transfer level English here just for comparison purposes. As Terrence and Craig alluded to, we only have access to community college data, and it's not linked to high school data. So we know, because of AB 705, some English learners are now going directly to TLE, but we cannot identify them until we're able to access this cradle to career data set. We know they're going there, and their success is unknown. Or you can also rely on CalPAS data, which is what Terrence and Craig used. So that's definitely possible for, even if it's a subset of the high schools participating in this partnership. So with that in mind, when we do look at passing rates for colleges and students offering these alternate pathways to college composition for English learners, we find that students have significantly higher pass rates than the standard college composition course. On average, first-time students starting in transfer level English have a 59% pass rates. Students starting in transfer level English with ESL support, with ESL equivalent, pass at a 70% pass rate, and those in the English for TLE for multilingual speakers are passing at 75 pass rate if they're first-time students. And as I noted, at this moment, we are disentangling the TLE for previous English high school students who were English learners that's a limitation of our current study, and hopefully, as was noted, the cradle to career data set will help us with that in the near future. Let's see, I know we're almost out of time, but I'll just highlight that, let's see. When we looked at the data across different racial ethnic groups, we also see that across all racial ethnic groups, students are passing these ESL courses with English language support for ESL students at a higher rate. First-time Asian students are more likely to pass the standard transfer level English courses, and they have higher pass rates in the TLE for multilingual students. Latino students have the highest pass rates in the transfer level ESL for transfer level English with ESL equivalents, and white students only have slightly higher pass rates in these TLE courses for English learners. And we also see that outcomes vary by other social and demographic factors. US citizens are more likely to pass the standard transfer level English course. Permanent residents and student visa holders are more likely to pass the TLE ESL equivalents, and international high school graduates in the transfer level English for multilingual support outperform those in the ESL equivalent courses. And I just want to pause here. This is based on a small group of colleges and small number of sections. So we definitely need more, as these courses are scaled and more students are served, we definitely want to continue to monitor to ensure that these higher success rates persist. So as with everything, as you scale, it's just important to ensure that student success continues to be front and center. So with that, I'll just wrap up with a few policy recommendations. So first, we recommend, as Terrence and Craig noted, that colleges expand access to college composition to English learners. As our report suggests, providing direct access to college comp produces higher rates of successful completion than students, as our research and the research that Terrence and Craig suggest, this seems to be the way to go. Second, we also recommend that colleges monitor the validity and effectiveness of these rules. English learners' likelihood of enrolling in college composition should not depend on which college that English learner attends. Otherwise, these inequities will persist, and students' chances of completing transfer level English will continue to depend on where they enroll and their zip code, and that it's not the way the system should be. And so our third recommendation is to make connections between ESL reforms and other system-wide initiatives. And this is where I feel like that where the growth we've seen in the transfer level ESL equivalents and just other transfer level ESL offerings is that offering these transfer level ESL courses through dual enrollment partnerships like the college and career access pathways, for example, could really boost college enrollments while also really helping support college going among English learners who are in high school, because as you all may know, this group of students is also much less likely to attend college. And I just want to say shout out, Cuyamaca College is one of those colleges that is already offering ESL courses through dual enrollment to high school students. We also feel like there are opportunities for colleges to replicate some of the work that's happening at Cypress College, where they're offering ESL milestone certificates to recognize a student's work in learning another language and making progress towards a program of study. And this connects with ESL, AB 705, Guided Pathways, the funding formula, Vision for Success, and connected to the dual enrollment. we envision like a next phase of this work, actually offering some of these to high school students as another way to boost college going for this population who has been underserved. And so our fourth recommendation is actually arose from the conversations we had with faculty in the field. And this is that more guidance and information is provided to inform ongoing efforts. I think what I'll highlight here is that there's just a demand for like more guidance and also research to help inform and improve efforts, and also to clarify what AB 1705 actually means for ESL. And finally, I don't think I need to say anything else. I think we all would benefit from a cradle to career data system, and it's exciting to know that that's actually on the horizon, and this would just enable us to better track English learners across their educational journey from high school through post-secondary, and hopefully into the labor market. So that concludes my presentation. Here's our contact information. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you so much, Olga and Terrence and Craig. Thank you also for answering most of the questions as they came up in the chat. Are there any additional questions? You can feel free to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat. We have just a couple of minutes left here. You guys answered every question that exists in your presentation. So impressive. Well, oh, wait.
Can I just say one thing, Summer? I just
Sure.
wanted
Yeah.
to say, you know, in the interest of time, we were very focused on students who have degree and transfer goals. And I did put a link in the chat to a longer paper where we look at ed goals, kind of in some depth, the ed goals of graduating U.S. high school seniors, and make a claim that's based in the data that U.S. high school graduating U.S. high school students are vast majority are clearly focused on degree and transfer, and that in fact most of them should be encouraged to be degree transfer seeking. So we do treat that as a block of degree transfer seeking students. But there is variability, of course, in the mission of community colleges, and that 37% number from the earlier slides in Terrence and my presentation we're looking at a subset of the overall population of students that are availing themselves, English learners who are availing themselves of the California Community College system. So there's certainly, lots of room for the lifelong learning mission, and the non-credit sequence. I think our research doesn't really directly speak to that. There were some interesting thought-provoking exchanges that there may be some implications, kind of downstream implications that are affecting those areas. But I think those are things that we need to, raise the visibility of and have a thoughtful discussion about, so that we really are serving all of the populations that we're intending to serve.
Thank you, Craig. I do see we have a couple of questions in our last minute here. Jan, did you want to ask your question?
I just wanted to clarify that in the data that was presented by Olga, when it's the success rates for transfer level English, was that for all students or was that specifically for English language learners?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I want to clarify that as much as possible, because yes, often it is all students, just for comparison purposes, and within that is a population of students who we cannot identify due to data limitations that would be considered English learners. Because of their experience in high school, because they graduated from high school having taken English, English learner courses, or may have or may not have been reclassified. The point is they made it, and now because they're U.S. high school graduates, they're going straight into that course. And one exciting thing, though, I want to point out that I think for what we learned from AB 1705 is that because this was happening, ESL departments were more motivated to develop these ESL equivalents or these English for multilingual students, because these students who may still need support would not be getting them in this the traditional TLE course. So that's why we recommend that, you know, for this population, maybe they may not, all their needs might not be met there, and we don't know because we can't see, at least our data, we cannot observe them. We cannot pull them out at the moment. Cradle to Career, hopefully we'll change that soon.
Thank you, Olga. Maybe one last quick question from Katie, and then we'll wrap things up. Well, I called on her and she disappeared. Katie, are you here?
Oh, yes, I am. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Just what I said earlier about, I'm really curious about grades, you know, and also different pedagogy and grading practices among ESL and English instructors. I'm also seeing with AB 705 with English classes too, you know, students getting lower grades, and sometimes students will drop because they know they won't get into their nursing program or things like that with those grades. So with all of these reforms, as they improve equity in some ways, I just want to remind people to be curious about what a grade says and what it doesn't say, what success says and what it doesn't say.
Yeah, I think a lot of our research going forward is going to be getting more into the partnering with faculty to get into equity pedagogy and grading practices, and some of these new things coming out like ungrading, and getting into more detail in partnership with faculty to help assess some of those practices and how they can benefit students. Because a lot of our talk today was pretty high level, state level policy stuff, but in that is interesting, but doesn't always address everything at the detailed classroom level.
And just to quickly wrap up, our first two webinars in the series were really focused on that classroom level. So if you're interested in going back and looking at, the first one looked at a class, it was actually my class and Rebecca Beck, who we teach the same curriculum, but she teaches it with an ESL co-rec and I teach it with a standard English co-rec. So we looked at the differences and the similarities in those two classes. And then the second webinar was focused on best practices for teaching English learners in the standard transfer level English. So those are both on the CAP website with recordings and materials if you're interested. And in the interest of time, I will wrap up here. I want to thank you all. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to our attendees. We will have this up on the CAP website in the next week or so. And we appreciate you all. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.